The problem also comes from this description that the scriptures is patriarchal, which is not true. When you look at at least the Europeans' description of patriarchy, and you compare it to the scripture, it's not the same at all.
You're absolutely right. Because we love our women. We respect our women. We love them as we love ourselves. So, I mean, just simply saying that
is something I want to bring up.
Our women. If our scripture tells us to love our women as we love ourselves, anything negative you got to say is out the damn door.
Mm-hmm. In Europe, at least during the medieval time, women had no rights. Well, actually, the only people that had rights were the adult males, because even males, you see in certain writings, like, I don't know if you ever saw that movie Brother Son, but the son, because he didn't want to yield to his father threw him out, and kicked the crap out of him in the middle of the street. And even in Romeo and Juliet, because neither of them wanted to get married to each other and not to their own people and the parents, and that's why they eventually committed suicide, because even young boys, if they didn't go along with what their parents said, they would get beaten up, they could get killed. So even with that, I don't know if that's really patriarchal. That sounds more like dictatorial or something. But Hebrew culture is definitely not patriarchal, because it describes in the situation between Yitzhak and the Rivka and Rachel and Leah and Yaakov and Rebecca, and he had to and then when he asked her father for her hand in marriage, and her father asked her for her opinion, that is not something that ever went on, and not typically in European culture, where the father asked, "Oh, do you accept this man?" and she was fully able to say no if she wanted to. But in European culture, absolutely not. I mean, there may have been some cases, but that was just a practice within that family, that the parent allowed their daughter to have a little bit of freedom. But typically, legally, the daughter had to go along with whatever the father said, or else he was legally allowed to kill her or forsake her to the church, because she wasn't being obedient to her parents.
What do they call that? That's a law over there in the East, right? That's called something where they're allowed to mercy kill, or allowed to do that.
I can't remember what it's called, but in Muslim culture, they have that too. Where if the children don't go along with what the parents say, they can be killed. They can be stoned.
I just want to comment on what the sister Zahara said. She's absolutely correct. And it's interesting that she's engaged in that type of study. It goes to show me that she's been researching, and that's good. And the reason why that's important is because, our objective is we have to remove the residue of the oppressors, Western mindset, culture, and livelihood from our lives. It needs to be purged. And we have to go back to the indigenous roots that our forefathers and foremothers have left behind for us in our culture, right? And it requires understanding the European essence that we're beholden to, and when we don't identify that, then we start to take their spirit and act a particular way towards our women and even our own people. So that type of research that she expressed is potent in order for us to reclaim our roots and get back to our roots. It's actually a book. It says, I see the sister likes to research. There's a book you can get, or if you want, I can email it to you. It's called Women in the Ancient Near East. And if you read this book, it's by Der Grutier.
I think I've heard of him.
Huh?
I think I've heard of that author before.
Yeah, it's translated by Helen and Mervyn Richardson. And if you read that book, it goes into things such as a woman's rights as far as inheritance, women's marriage being equal as far as her rights as the man. It goes into,
What is that called again?
It's called Women in the Ancient Near East. says Martin Stoll, but it was translated by Helen and Mervyn Richardson.
Yeah, I see. Wow,
Yeah.
that's expensive.
Yeah, so I got the PDF if you want it, but it goes into Levite marriages, women's rights of inheritance. It goes into the women, the widows. It goes into priestesses. It goes to the value placed on women. It goes into a lot of stuff. It's a great read, and I always recommend it to women who are in our culture that wants to see an unbiased perspective of how our culture was before we transitioned away from it. Because when we went into captivity, a huge transition occurred that removed us from the pre-exilic state that the ancient Israelites were in. It was a huge paradigm shift that happened when we went into captivity, and we started to adopt a lot of things that were not indigenous to us. And a good example of that, a very obvious example of that, is the reckoning of time. You know,
that's why it's important to research the history, because a lot of people have absorbed this concept that it's patriarchal, and then, you know, with women, some black females, they will use that and then say the Bible's oppressive and blah blah blah, and it's not true.
And I've done a whole lecture on some of that. It's called "The Closed Mouth Didn't Get Pled." So if you go to my YouTube channel, and Truthfully Honest was very nice enough to put the link to my channel in the description. But if you click on that, there's a video I have in there called "Closed Mouth Didn't Get Pled." And I talk about some of that information because I wanted to ensure that in order for us as a nation of people to get a true jubilee from a lot of the oppression, we have to first re-examine the male-female relationship within our culture, you know, and we have to avoid oppressing and suppressing one another. So I just wanted to give that reference because I see that you research and study, and I wanted that to be a tool to empower you in your understanding on getting back to the indigenous state of the pre-exilic ancient Israelites and how they viewed women, you know, and the rights that women had. And a lot of that changed when they went into captivity. A lot of that stuff changed when they went into captivity.
Well, I know that originally, even before they became adopted into Yahweh through the covenant, their culture was like totally different. They were, I would say, I don't know what I would compare to. You had where in my reading, women, if a man or woman wanted to get together, they just move into a tent together and live together. And then the man, if he didn't feel like living with her anymore, or she didn't feel like living with him, then they'd leave. Yeah. And there was no marriage contract, which is one of the reasons why Yah had to establish the laws that he did.
Yeah, the reason why is because during those times, you didn't have a nation, right? So you just had these groups of people that lived together, and they had customs and traditions, and they had ethics and certain values that was passed down via oral tradition. They were not a nation of people. When you become a nation, you have to create laws and bylaws, statutes, in order to govern minuscule things that occur within society, such as marriage, such as inheritance rights, such as land ownership, such as not oppressing people in the gates, keeping this Shabbat. So you have a different dynamic when you're just a group of people as opposed to an established nation. So, so you know, when we see that he picked a Canaanite person, and we go back to Yaakov, and Yaakov went to towards Syria, and his uncle Laban and his daughters, they were Syrian, right? That was where his mother's family was from. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, they were always, you know, intermingled within those people. Even Esau married Canaanites, you know what I'm saying, that were Canaanite women. So this was always a thing. Even leaving out of Kemet, you know, and going into Canaan, they also interfaced and intermingled with the Canaanites, you know, and we see that in Judges chapter 1 and Judges chapter 2. Until the Most High had to say, you have to separate because you guys are going after their Elohim, their divine counsel, right? You're putting them face to face with me. That's what he says in Shemot chapter 20. He says, "Deny, do not put any other powers before my face." And that's exactly what they were doing, and that is why he had to penalize them. But ultimately, you'll see by looking at reconstructive history, or what's called corrective history, in regards to the pre-exilic state of the Israelites from the Exodus all the way into the Assyrian and then later on the Babylonian captivity. There's a whole culture that was there that exists that we can look through historical record, the archaeological record, do textual criticism, comparative studies of other cultures, and we can reconstruct actually the lives that they had. The fortunate thing is today, a lot of the lens in which we see that time period comes from Second Temple Judaism, and Judaism as a religion formulated when the Israelites was in captivity. It didn't exist prior to that. There's no need for religion when you have a state-sponsored culture that if anybody becomes a citizen of that culture, proper civics dictates that you have to abide by this constitution that is established for that nation state of people, you know, and this is to ensure that nobody's bringing any other foreign deities in there, any foreign customs in there that will undermine what the Most High is establishing with the children of Israel, right? So it's a very intriguing study, and I've done a lot of immense work in that area. I've submitted academic articles on that. I've done lectures on that, and that is an area of fascination to me, is how can we inductively reconstruct that period of time independent of Second Temple Judaism commentating and telling us what occurred from their lens of Judaism as opposed to the cultural dynamics that existed prior to Judaism coming on the scene, you know. But anyway, I just wanted to give you that reference because I know when you read it, you'll appreciate it, and it'll help you be a tool to help you in your further studies and looking and reconstructing the rights of women and the prominence of women during that time period. I mean, if it was a purely patriarchal state, you would not have a judge prophetess. That wouldn't exist. You wouldn't have a queen. That wouldn't exist. You wouldn't have a situation where Josiah and them find a book and they got to go to the ghetto and find a woman in order to tell them, well, what is the Most High saying? Is we don't know what this text is trying to convey to us. And she has to break it down for them. You don't have these elements in a purely patriarchal society, right? And there's other accounts in there too that's replete throughout the text that people overlook, right? Because they're looking at it from Second Temple Judaism, which is a religion that the Yahudim developed while being in Babylonian captivity, which was a highly patriarchal society, right? And this is why even the genealogical factor came into account, because this is a way in order to preserve your bloodline and your inheritance while you're in captivity. So everything had to go through the father. But interestingly enough, if you go to Vayikra chapter 24, verse 10, and we have a situation where you have this half-bred child who was half Israelite through his mother, and he was Egyptian through his father. He was considered an Israelite because of his connection to his mother. He was put to death because he blasphemed the Most High's name, but he was considered part of the camp, right? He was considered part of the regular people that lived amongst them through his mother's lineage. So there's a lot of things that's in the text that people tend to overlook because they're viewing it from a patriarchal Second Temple Judaism worldview, right? And even later on, when you look at the Mishnah, the Gemara, which is in the Talmud, there's also some things that's preserved in the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud that also showed you how important rights were to women and what rights that women had. And even if you reconstruct it from the Torah, you'll see that a lot of laws were designed to preserve women because men had daughters and they wanted to ensure that their virgin daughters was not in the hands of a criminal. For example, and I'll say this and I'll transition forward because I know the brother had asked a question, but the most important thing is that you see in Devarim chapter 22, in a situation when a man lays hold of a woman, thereby he takes away her virginity, and then it goes to say that he has to pay a dowry price to the father and that she has to live with him for all the days of her life. Yes. That's just one part of that precept. The complementary precept says once that situation occurs, the father has to give the final say of whether or not he's going to allow his daughter to be that man's wife. And if he says no, then that man can't take her. Yeah. So we tend to overlook that. But this goes to show that women had a lot of rights and they did not have to subjugate themselves to things that were not righteous, right? That was oppressive. If a man was unable to provide for his wife and children, she can leave. He has to let her go. He cannot keep her and hold on to her and stuff like that. If she decides, hey, I got to go because I'm not being taken care of and this is your duty, the children not be taken care of and this is your duty, therefore, I got to be let go.
Yeah, and actually, it's a pretty strong judgment. It says a man that does not take care of his household is worse than an infidel. And then another verse it says an infidel is worthy of hellfire. So,
yeah, from the Pre-Exilic. Yeah, and Shaul goes on and he expounds on that, saying that unbeliever is an infidel, and a man who takes his house is equal to an unbeliever. So this is why when we go into the text and when he's talking about the believer and non-believer, the moment that man decides not to cater to his household, then he becomes an unbeliever to that wife who is a believer. So now,
and also because the structure that Yah set up, Yah is the father, we are his children, Yah takes care of his children. So if a man takes not care of his own, he is disrespecting Yah's position as our father.
exactly. And also don't forget the ruach, or the spirit, which is a feminine noun in Hebrew. It's also the nurturing aspect of the creator, right? And its job is to nurture us while he watches over us. The same way that a husband and wife, when they're together, the man is a protector and provider, and the wife is a nurturer and caretaker of the home, right? So we see the same dynamics or the same principles in our creator. So these things tend to get overlooked when people only view the text from a very short-sighted lens that prevents them from actually doing reconstructive history to see how things actually went down in ancient times.
The European view also has a lot of an effect on it, holding on to that ideology that, well, it was a European book, or that it's a patriarchal book. It affects a person's ability to truly understand the text.
I agree. And this is why you have to sometimes do comparative cultural studies to see the surrounding cultures in order to see what things that we see that is vaguely referenced in the text, and we can actually see what was going on through comparative cultural studies in the culture surrounding Israel at the time. And it helps us to reconstruct missing pieces so that we can fully engage and understand what occurred. And archaeology helps us to see with that as well. So I hope that you continue to endeavor on that journey. And again, we're not saying, and I'm not saying, I speak for myself, I'm not saying that the man's role is usurped, right? Because the woman has certain rights afforded to her that the man may not have been previously privy of. We're saying is that there's still roles that both parties have to play, you know, and when both parties are in their roles, you don't have to force the opposite party to do something. It will come instinctively and naturally, right? And this is the approach that we have to take. Even that word helpmate is incorrectly translated. It should not say helpmate. Now, I probably go into that another time because I really wanted to address what the brother was saying. But go back and look into the Hebrew word for helpmate. It doesn't say helpmate. That's a false translation because it gives a very subjugative state of the woman, and that is not what the text is saying. It actually says opposite strength. Research, you can look into that.
It says the word is ezer.
That's one word. And what's the other one? The root is neged.
And
right.
Yeah, Ezed and then neged. I'm on a Blue Letter Bible. Now it says one who helps or succor for Ezed, but the other word neged says what is conspicuous, what is in front of, before your face.
So
or against, in the presence of. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so when we read it in the Hebrew, it says, "Wa yomer Yahuwah Elohim lo tob chayot ha'adam lebadau eser lo ezer kenegdau." Right? So we're looking for the helper, suitable helper. Now, the interesting thing is the Most High also takes on the attribute of a helper. If you go to Tehillim 89 and 19, it says, "I have given help to one who is mighty, who is strong." Because a person who is mighty can't get strength from something that's weak. It has to be something, huh?
I know, I was agreeing with you.
Oh, yeah. So it has to be something that is opposite, but has a strength according to a role. When the Israelites were being oppressed on numerous occasions, they had cried out for the Most High to come and redeem them, right? And the Most High was considered that ezer to them, that power when they were powerless. So the times when the man is powerless or vulnerable, he has to have something there as an opposite strength to ensure that he is in his proper role, right? So when a man does not look at a woman in that fashion, then he tends to look at her as an object as opposed to a subject that's predicated upon his survival and for him to thrive in this harsh reality that we call captivity.
Yeah, and like the description of the woman in Virtuous Woman, she's not a mere helpmate. She has her own business.
What is the word virtue there? Virtuous. That word virtuous is hayil. Look up that word and see what that word means. It means valor. And it's a title used for mighty men or the Giborim that went to war. Why would you give a woman that title unless her role has to require her to have that type of strength? Why would you want to keep something like that oppressed? Why would you want to keep something like that inside, behind closed doors? Why would you want to do something like that? That is representative of your strength as a man, because that's your opposite strength in your times of need. So it's a way that we have to shift the dynamic of the family unit and be able to use what the ancient culture was trying to convey to us on what the roles are. And when you walk in these roles and identify the role of the opposite party, and it's organic in regards to how it's cohesively brought together, where you don't have to force anything, the opposite party does their part, and it forces you to do your part, not because they're telling you to, not because they trying to beat you over the head with precept after precept. It's because once they give you the conveyance that's from the Ruach on how that unit is supposed to function, then everybody plays their role accordingly. The problem was when we look at the story of the Nachas, the snake, talking to Hawa, Eve, and Adam, and causing the family dynamic to shift, because the Nachas, or the bronze one, he went and spoke to the woman, right? And this is interesting because when we go to the Pauline epistles, we see a situation in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 where Paul says that women, when they cover their head, have power over angels. And people tend to overlook that and not understand what that means. When a woman is covered the right way according to Torah by her opposite strength, then what that does is that it creates a shield or a barrier for any outside spiritual entities to come and make their way into the home. So being that this oppressive society has an agenda to destroy the black home, which we would call the Israelite home, their objective is, if we can get the man out, then we can subjugate the woman and the children to all these outside influences, and they will have no shield to protect them.
Yeah, and that's why it's interesting, because in Blue Letter Bible has the word hayil, and they reference the word strong. So then, there are black men who will say, "Oh, I'm tired of these strong black women," but the perception that a lot of black people have of what a strong black woman is, and what Yah describes according to Proverbs 31 as a strong Israelite woman, is not the same thing.
It's not, because in a man's mind, that term strong black woman has a negative connotation because it's associated with feminism, right? Feminism is not something we promote in our community because it's destructive to the black home. But the strength that the woman possesses is this: if I go to a man that's an Israelite and he has a wife, and when he leaves, she can't function, something's wrong. Because in the absence of the husband, because he was at the gates, he was on a journey doing his stuff, she was taking care of the home. She was handling business. You know why? Because he ensured that she had all the tools necessary to ensure that the home was being taken care of in its absolute form, in his absence. So if that woman is weak and she can't function in the absence of her husband, then that goes to show that something's wrong with that relational dynamic.
Yeah, because Rabbi Shaul references how if at a time a man feels his marriage and his household is keeping him from his service to the Most High, he is to separate from the wife for a time, but only come back together when they feel the need to, have sex. So that means that the woman is left to run the house. You can't be a weak woman and run the house, especially in those days where they didn't have all of the little special equipment that helps you run a home. You had to haul water yourself. You had to start a fire yourself. You had to, take care of the animals and take care of the crops yourself. A weak woman can't do that.
She can't. An oppressed woman can't do that. You know why? Because she'll be in fear that she's not doing everything correctly, right? So when we go back to the cultural dynamic that's been hidden from us, and again, we as a black people, who we call quote unquote black as a byword, we have to reconstruct our past because it has been hidden from us. And if we go back to it, we can reshape and better formulate how the family structure is supposed to operate. You know what I'm saying? So this is pivotal, and giving these tools to our women so that way they can expound on it, they can go into their role, and then we can better reconstruct the home. A man is not supposed to beat the woman's role into her. She has to naturally assume that role when the man is doing what he's supposed to do, right? So that's just my perspective on that.
And also, the story of Ruth.
He's going to stop. Go ahead.
Sorry, but I just remember the story of Ruth. And Naomi. You couldn't be a weak woman and then be alone out there like that, especially in those times.
I agree. And you know, in a lot of cases, even if we look at Deborah, right? When Deborah was the judge prophetess, the king at the time was so weak that he refused to go into war without her. You don't bring no woman into war. But guess what? She rode with him. She said, all right, I'm going to go with you. Because they understood the opposite strength factor. They understood that. A purely patriarchal society would have oppressed that woman. And
we have to be very careful with these Western concepts. They're really damaging our people. Really damaging.
True.
I agree. And these type of discussions help to revitalize or resurrect things that have been buried and kept hidden from us. So my objective is to question what we've been taught and our current worldview to ensure that it's indigenous to the roots of the heritage left behind by forefathers and foremothers that the Most High intended for us to have today. And it takes a lot of grievous work to do that type of research. But the moment that we engage it, it will give us so many epiphanies that we will be a changed people. The whole dynamic within our community will change, right? And then real power will be expressed through us, and the oppressor would have to bear witness to the Most High raising us up as he intended.